So, hi, this is Jon Reed, Diginomica. I've got a real treat for you. Once again, I've got Conor Riordan of the UKISUG user group lead. Welcome.
Hey, John. Great to be here.
Yeah, and we have commandeered some chairs. Thank you for helping me to improvise. A little bit of background noise, but I think it should be good enough for our purposes today. We're at the tail end of SAP Sapphire Orlando, and now we can try to make sense, Conor, of what just happened. My question for you would be, why do you fly across the pond for this? Because there's so many events. You put on great events. You can talk to SAP locally. What's the payoff for being here?
Yeah, so I suppose for me, it's a number of things. So I was actually in Waldorf last week. So I got to meet Christian and Thomas and Sebastian and the team. So we actually heard a lot of the messages before we came here and a lot of the announcements. But I think the key thing coming here is you want to get customer reaction. You know, what are the customers thinking about the announcements and why does it matter? And as we go back to our own user groups in the UK and Ireland, it's like, how do we reposition our offering in the next 12 months in line with maybe how the industry is changing and the strategy? So it's really trying to gauge what our members are looking for. And really this is a great place to get it. So we get to talk to the partners, we get to talk to SAP, we get to talk to customers, and you get a real sense of where this is going. And I think this week for me, there was a real buzz. I think there was a bigger buzz this year than there was last year. I think there was a kind of a real excitement about, I think what SAP did this week was they painted a North Star, not necessarily what they're going to be delivering in the next 3 months, but they positioned the North Star of where they're going with a level of confidence that maybe they didn't have last year. And I think customers are probably excited about it, at the same time scratching their heads, figuring out how do we get here. So I think a lot of positive energy. I think it was a good conference for SAP and a good conference for customers as well, because I think they're seeing, the art of the possible.
One thing that's kind of on my mind is something you brought up just a minute ago before we started taping, which is, so we have Joule for consultants and all the sub-agents dealing with different aspects of the implementation process and the migration process in particular. It's fascinating to think about where this leaves all the trusted services partners that customers rely on. And what are your thoughts about some of these changes? Is this going to throw a wrench in things? Is this mostly a positive shift, or?
I think when you look at it from a customer viewpoint, I think it's a positive shift. I think part of the challenge of moving to S4 for a lot of customers, I think we talked about last year, it's a business case. For a lot of organizations, these are complex moves. They're not going to do a business transformation as well as a technical transformation. So step one, you do the technical transformation.
Yeah.
Really, you want to get it done as quick as you can for as cheap as you can. And I think what SAP have done this week with their 7 AI agents is they've provided a capability that could potentially reduce, upgrade cycle times by 30 to 40%. And if you can reduce the cycle time by 30 to 40%, in theory, you can also reduce the cost by 30 to 40%. So I think from a customer perspective, that's good news. I think from a partner perspective, obviously they got to figure out what does that mean for them, because, reduced cycle time is also reduced revenue. But again, depending on the amount of demand out there, it does mean for some partners that where their books are full, they may be able to still, get through this, maybe hit the same revenue numbers by just covering more customers. So it'll be interesting to see what the feedback is from the partner community over time. But I think certainly from a customer viewpoint, it's a positive move. I think what we saw there this morning when Thomas was sharing in his keynote in terms of Joule going in, reviewing your code, looking at all your custom code, it was pretty neat stuff. And that's stuff that typically you could be spending weeks trying to figure out. The fact that could be done over a weekend, is a positive start. So I think that's good. I think Joule for consultants is also interesting. I was at the executive forum on Monday, and we had a company called Milliken presenting, and they've embraced Joule for consultant within their organization. And they say that it's kind of reduced their resilience on their need on SIs, because they can do more work themselves. And again, I think that's probably a positive move for customers as well. So from a customer perspective, I think it's good. From a partner perspective, they got to rethink.
Wake up call.
Yeah, it's like, maybe relooking at the offering in terms of how they're providing services using these tools versus the traditional way of how we consult. And some partners were doing it already and had developed their own tools, but I think now SAP are kind of accelerating that with the offerings today. So I think it's positive. I think it's positive from a customer perspective, and I think our community will certainly embrace it. I think talking to some of the other user groups, like my DSI colleagues are over here this week, they still have a huge proportion of their customers on ECC, and I think again it's the cost and it's the timelines, and I think again this can help them as well. I would say overall positive.
Yeah, and do you feel like this changes a little bit? Going back to last year, you and I talked a lot about this business case predicament that can really impact the modernization efforts. Do you think this changes potentially that equation a little bit, in the sense that you still have to have a business case, right?
Yeah, for sure.
At least the cost impact maybe gets a little bit less intense.
Yeah, I think if you can reduce your cost by 30-40%, it really does help, because you're trying to weigh up probably at the moment the cost of the upgrade with the cost of going extended maintenance, with the cost of not doing some of the AI stuff, and looking at alternative solutions. Because at the end of the day, even if you're not doing SAP AI, your business is requiring you to do some AI.
Right.
So you're either innovating on something else or you're innovating on SAP. So I think it certainly helps the business case for customers trying to explain why they want to go to S4 sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things for SAP is trying to incent that as much as possible. So they also made the announcement this week. I couldn't get the formal name of the program yet, but basically, if you're running on an older release, if you commit to the migration, then you can start consuming, a good chunk of the Joule AI functionality.
Yeah, I think for me, that probably got the biggest cheer in yesterday's keynote.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting on two fronts, and we actually pulled the string on this a bit last week as well with when we were over in Waldorf. So essentially, you got AI models on the public cloud today, and you got AI models on the private cloud. And I think what SAP are saying is that if you're on-prem S4 customer, if your data models match the private cloud data models, then in theory you can use those agents. So I think for S4 on-prem customers, there's probably going to be a big opportunity here. I think for the ECC customers, there'll be some agents available, but because the data model shifted so much between ECC and S4, I don't think it's going to be as there probably won't be as many agents available, but there'll be some. So I think, again, for customers that are on ECC that can use Joule, I think that's a good thing, because certainly you hear back from customers when the CFO goes and they ask, are we using SAP AI? And I say, no, we can't, because we're not on RISE. It's just a bad message. So to be using some Joule and then maybe use that as a business case to help drive discussion around, well, we could use more Joule if we were on S4, and even if we were on RISE, we could even use more Joule. It helps that sales pitch as well within an organization. So I think it was a smart move by SAP, and I think it was probably long overdue. I think they could have done it sooner, but I think it's a good move.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You brought up this data model issue, right? Which is something that I've talked with Jeff Scott of ASUG about a lot. Which is Jeff kind of challenges the ECC customer base around look, this platform really isn't equipping you with what you need for the challenges of the modern business environment. It just isn't, right? So take a hard look at that. And I totally understand his point of view. And on our podcast taping we did with ASUG Talks earlier today, we had some back and forth on that, because I totally get where he's coming from. But I also think there are times where, as an organization, maybe you're even aware that ECC isn't your long-term, but you have other short-term things going on, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you have a merger and acquisition scenario that has you frozen in place for a little bit or whatever. But at the same time, you're hearing from your executive team, what are you doing about AI, right?
Yeah,
And
for sure.
so I really hope that SAP continues, I don't know what you think, but I hope they continue to really look at that from an ECC and older release perspective in terms of why would you want to turn away anyone in your customer base who wants to work on AI right now? I mean, I realize that the data model issues can make it a little harder at times and all of that, but there's plenty of vendors that are happy to go into those customers right now and start working with them. So,
100%. And I think, John, I mean, part of the challenge is like ECC was a best of breed system. Like, I mean, and for many organizations, it is doing the job that it is
still running.
It's like it's like a diesel BMW. It just keeps going and going and going. So when you're looking at is it a burning platform from a process viewpoint? Probably not. From a technology viewpoint, it is. So that's part of the challenge is like, you're not trying to fix something that's necessarily terribly broken. But you're trying to re-platform onto a newer technology that allows you to embrace AI.
Right.
And I think because we haven't got to the tipping point yet of companies using AI at an enterprise level that is driving fundamental change in how they run their business, that the competition is going, oh my God, we need to innovate quick in order to catch up. Because that hasn't happened yet, the tipping point is not there. So I think until that tipping point comes, which I think based on this week's announcements of the autonomous enterprise, I think it could come in the next 12 to 18 months. And then you could see you're at a genuine competitive disadvantage of being on ECC. Where today, to be honest, I don't think you're at a huge competitive disadvantage being on ECC. But I think in 18 months' time, you might be. And it's a question of how long it's like a game of poker. How long do you hold out before you make the switch? Because you're going to have to make the switch either way. So it's when is the right time to make it?
Yeah. And you know what I think is so interesting is like just the kind of back and forth you and I are having right now about this. To me, this feels like the essential conversations, right? Like that there's not necessarily one right answer to this, right? But it seemed, and I assume that you feel the same about the UKISUG right now in your user group organization, but it seems like this is such an important time for users to have the opportunity to come together and ask these questions and have these arguments, right? And say,
absolutely,
can I compete on ECC going forward? Why or why not?
Yeah. I mean, this is to me is like you going into the garage to trade in your car. Like your car is getting you to work every day. It's going fine. Yeah, it might be cost you a bit more in service or, stuff's bit starting to break. But it's that point of, I need to switch the car. But then when you buy your new car, you go, oh my God, why didn't I switch earlier? Because this new car is so brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's kind of one of those decisions, like to me, ECC is not broken, but it's had its day. And you've got to trade it in at some point.
Yeah.
And it's when are you going to do it? How much is it going to cost? The announcements this week are going to make it easier because it's going to accelerate the timelines.
Right.
And get you onto the next platform so you can start innovating.
So let's talk a little bit about the controversy around SAP's changed API policies, because I have my opinions about it. The so-called the LinkedIn viral content economy had a lot of attention-seeking opinions about it that I thought had a wide degree of validity from zero to pretty strong, well-thought views. How did this sort of hit your members and your organization?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of, so I say we were in Waldorf last week. I think based on the conversations there, the genuine feedback from SAP was, look, it was just poor, it really genuinely was poor communication, and they tried to explain it to us. And my understanding is that there was one specific API that is available to transfer data from between two SAP systems. And maybe over the years, organizations were using that API to transfer data out of SAP into other systems. And the primary concern with that was that the resilience of that API and the security around the API is not resilient enough. And therefore, companies potentially could be opening themselves up to threats. And so what they're recommending is that there are other APIs to do the same work. And so the conversation was around, you cannot use this API, but you can use other APIs. And somehow in their communication and conversation, it came out different. Yeah. And I think that's what they're trying to explain to us last week. But I think they put up their hand and said they just did a poor job. And I kind of read on LinkedIn as well, all the commentary on it. And there's so many different points of view on it. But that was a simple one they gave us last week. And I think, I know you're meeting Philipp later on, it'd be good to get it. But for me, it was like, I've taken it at face value. They're saying, look, there was this API. It was being used in a different way than what it was designed for, which was internal SAP to SAP system migrations, and that it has a vulnerability that they don't intend to patch. And so they're recommending going a different route. I think the other thing Christian said last week, I think he reiterated today, this week, was, SAP are never going to be charging customers again to get access to their own data. So, they kind of reinforced the message that, they won't restrict customers using their own data in other places like we had years ago with the usage policies, and they're not going to go back there. So hopefully, it didn't seem to come up as a major topic this week around the hall. So hopefully they've put it to bed. But yeah, sometimes these things, just poor communication, and it can cause a whirlwind,
So you were relatively satisfied with your organization with what you heard.
I think so.
Once you got the clarification.
Yeah, and I suppose my background is I'm not that technical. It's more on the business side. So at face value, it seemed reasonable explanation. I do read on LinkedIn a lot of the technical guys getting into the level of detail, but I think their intent. So when you think about intent, the intent, they said, is not to prevent customers using their data in other ways. So that wasn't the intent. And the other intent is to make sure that when you are exporting data, you're doing it in a secure way. Right. Which seemed reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for those listeners on this topic, I've got a meeting with Philipp Herzig after this podcast taping, where we're going to be discussing this topic on the record. So I'll have more to say about it later. I was really pleased that user groups got involved in talking with SAP around this, because I know that SAP improved and clarified its online FAQs based on that input. And I really like it when the user groups get involved like that. Obviously, I wish that had happened sooner, because I think it would have helped a lot in this case.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I know Jeff and the team, and Jens and Mario and DSAG, got on fairly quickly. And, it was kind of hopefully put to bed quite quickly. And I think as well, SAP even last week appreciated the fact that we did get involved and get to them and work with them, and also to communicate back out to the communities.
I can tell listeners what I will say to Philipp is that I do think that this did cause confusion for customers, and I think it had somewhat of a chilling effect for partners on their ambitions around building SAP AI solutions. And my view is that it's going to take SAP a while to kind of prove out their new and improved messaging on this. And the proof is in what happens, right? The proof is in the decisions that customers and partners make on, they have other choices on where to build and how to approach AI.
Yeah.
And SAP is, I think, making a very strong case that their platform is a great platform for their customers, especially around these core enterprise workloads and issues, because of all the context, all the data context SAP is bringing, including the work they're doing on the tabular models. And, so SAP is working really hard on the context for all of that. But now you have to prove that you can really use that data openly and reliably, and, and not feel like customers are being forced. Because honestly, if SAP does, my view is SAP does this the right way, they won't have to force customers really at all, because they'll offer a better solution than you can get by making API calls on third-party platforms. So
no, absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. So you heard, I think, some things that you were really hoping to hear this week. Were there other things that either you didn't like how they were presented, or just things that you wish SAP had emphasized a little more? Or
I think probably the stuff that's still out there is the whole pricing models and how this is all going to work, and consumption-based pricing, and just, we had a great conversation actually with Thomas last week. It was around like, you build these agents, you use these agents, you deliver value with these agents, but is the value you're delivering with these agents proportionate to the cost of running the agents? So you deploy this stuff to eliminate work, but at what cost? Mm-hmm. And so there's, at some point, there needs to be a conversation around the return on investment on the agents in themselves. So it's easy to, I won't say it's easy to build. It is, one can build agents, one can deploy agents, one can spend loads of tokens on agents. How do we know that the agents are adding value versus the cost benefit analysis? And I think over time, that's going to become it's going to become more of a topic for CFOs as they start looking at the bills coming in and they want to try and apportion. You typically will try and apportion the costs of these bills across the various departments. So it's going to be, today it's kind of I won't say with an organization that's like a bit free, you're going in, you're running these agents, there's no consequence. But I think there's going to be a point where the cost benefit analysis of individual agents need to be understood, and departments will have to justify and say, if I'm running this agent and it's costing me $50,000 a year, and if the employee that was replaced was at $25,000 a year, like what am I doing here? And so I think over the next 18 months, we'll probably get there. And I think that's a bit where there needs to be a more practical discussion around how do we monetize and cost out these agents so that we have a real good understanding of the value of each one.
Yeah, that resonates with me. And look, I think most vendors are struggling with this, as you alluded to, in our discussions around the commercial model that we have with the analysts in SAP. There was definitely some confusion around what is being provided for free through like Joule assistance versus when SAP starts charging, which is essentially around agentic actions.
Yeah.
But how do you know when you're crossing over, for example, between free interactions and agentic? So there's some work there, but I think a really potent, interesting question is the difference between consumptions and outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm consuming a lot of AI, but not getting as many outcomes as I was looking for, right? Or maybe I'm getting about an 80% accuracy rate on the output, and I'm really happy with that, even on a consumption basis. But then it goes down to 60 for some reason because there's some drift in the model or something's changed in how the context is being delivered. And now I'm paying consumption on a 60% performance versus 80, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's just a really interesting world that we're moving into. And I think, honestly, I think the vendors that do the best with this are going to be the ones that are open and transparent about that and open to evolving their model. Because I don't know about you, but I think customers are willing to pay for value when they achieve it.
Oh, no, absolutely.
It's just they have to know how to track it and measure it.
And then they have to know how much it costs, and you got to be able to measure outcomes.
Yep.
I had a conversation with a colleague last week saying, if you had someone working in your organization that was only 80% accurate, they'd get sacked,
Yeah.
If they were 95%, they'd probably get sacked. But, is it acceptable to have an AI agent running at 80% accuracy?
Right.
Today, it seems to be...
In some areas of the business, probably yes.
Yeah.
In other areries, not so much.
Probably not so much. And I think that's where, when you're looking at a solution like SAP, and you wanted to get into the world of making decisions, making big decisions around financials, around credit, around, invoicing and stuff, that it needs to be as accurate as a human.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have invoice accuracy of 85%, 90%. It has to be 99.99%. And I think that's where, that's why I think SAP are a bit more positive this week and upbeat, in that I think with their knowledge graph, and with the semantic layer and with their data models, I think they feel they have finally got this cracked. And I think they think that this is going to differentiate them from the competitors who are trying to build this stuff, because that knowledge graph is the magic sauce in this.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to get it from the 80% to the 99%, I think.
Yeah.
Because that's where it's going to be hard. That's like the AI stuff itself. Like the logic is that's the easier bit. It's the business context around the process.
Yeah,
is the hard stuff.
And my personal feeling is we're not going to get to 99, but I think we're going to get to a point where a lot of use cases are possible, and whether we get to 99 or not will be really important. The reason I don't think we're going to get to 99, just between you and me, is that context is fragile, and I think in a lot of cases it will be, but then other cases it won't, and we'll try to figure out why. But that doesn't rule out a lot of really interesting things, because for example, if you're sorting, like Levi talked about how they had all these on stage. They talked about this, their agents, how with smaller vendors, all the information for onboarding them is spread out across PDF files and emails and all of that. Well, you don't need to get to 99 to have a huge impact on their productivity workflow for that, And so it'll be fascinating to see how close SAP can get. But I do believe you're right that they think they have a distinct competitive advantage, because whether it's 95 or 99, the point is it's going to be much more of a rich context than I think you're going to be able to get just by making API calls from SAP systems.
Yeah.
But they're going to have to prove that to their customers.
They're going to have to prove that. And I think certainly when you're looking at SOX processor under SOX controls, I think it's not just a question of having an agent running. It's a question of having the backup to show what the agent did, how it did it, what the algorithm it used, and be able to demonstrate that to an auditor to say, this is how we made that decision.
Yeah.
That is also going to be critical. I think when you hear JP Morgan stand up talking about their volumes, it's like, this stuff is important, like compliance is important, robustness, reproducibility, you don't run an agent today and get a different answer tomorrow to the same question. So that's, this stuff is really important at the enterprise level.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting from that vantage point, because one thing that a lot of vendors are starting to figure out, including SAP, what you refer to SOX compliance, and you can't necessarily get agents to like 99 or 100% all the time, but what you can do that is somewhat deterministic is you can stop them from doing the wrong things all of the time, because you can create, essentially, if the agent tries to do something it's not authorized to do, you can totally shut it down. Just as one example of that, I was at an event of an SAP competitors where we were building agents, and I built my little agent and I tried to publish it to all of their employees, and that was prevented.
Okay.
Like you won't be able to do it no matter what, right? Unless, of course, you hack it somehow or whatever. But the point is so that's why the compliance stuff is really, I think, promising right now, is the agent may not always interpret the user's request right or make the right tool call, but you can prevent it from doing things that compromise you with your auditor.
Yeah.
And that's the cool part.
I think so. And even though, this week they call it the autonomous enterprise, SAP are still talking about human-centric agentic AI. So when it comes to making the key decisions, they're presented to you within the Joule or whatever to say, what do you want to do? So it's still, there's a level of control in there where they're saying, we still believe that the human is a decision maker, but the agent is just processing at speed to generate the content, generate the output, so you can make a decision on what next step. And I think, again, that's clever, because it's easy to go out and market that you can automate the process end to end, and you can, but that's not what it's about. It's you need human-centric agentic AI, which is, to me, the right strategy as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's been a point that I've sort of emphasized with SAP in my conversations this week, is like, don't overdo it too much on the autonomous enterprise, because that can feel a little scary to customers. And also, saying to SAP, you've created a lot of nuance in how you can design these agents to include a lot of human approval steps if the organization wants that. So don't forget to emphasize that as well, right? That autonomy can be cool at times, especially for like core admin processes. But then there's times where you want a more sophisticated approach, and you're trying to help your humans do their jobs better. And anyway, I think SAP does really well with that. They just need to make sure that gets into their messaging also.
Yeah.
So, and another really interesting thing, I think, is, and I thought SAP did a good job this week on this with their customer interviews on stage with JP Morgan and H&M as well. They both talked about how the AI is working because all the foundational pieces are in place. And, I believe in this whole sort of SaaS versus AI thing, that what we're going to find is that the companies that are running on a more modern software and architecture platform in general are going to do better with AI also. Like it's going to be all about how the parts work together, not just agents on top of like kind of a messy substrate, going right to the jugular with agentic AI without sort of confronting the underlying realities. And it's not just software, right? It's a people and process. It's getting all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think Christian might have said it on the first day, like something like 8.5 million data records or data fields in the SAP product. And that's complex. Like that is really, really complex.
Yeah.
And so you start adding in all your edge systems and it gets even more complex. So I still think there's a part in this around process simplification as well. And that for organizations, it's getting your data right for a start.
Yeah.
But also trying to simplify your business processes and simplify your technical landscape. Because, with the best will in the world, like the more complex your landscape is, the more challenging it's going to be for these agents to be able to work at scale. Because there's just too many variations of combinations to manage to give you, a reliable output. So I think that's another thing I kind of took away is that there's still a place for simplification of your architecture and getting back to clean core, just to maximize the probability of your agents giving you the best out.
Absolutely. Which brings me to kind of my final thing I wanted to ask you about, which is sort of the public and private cloud thing. And in general, I kind of like where SAP is going, where they're focused a little bit more right now on getting your data and platform in a good place, like you said, clean core, rather than like whether you necessarily want to do private or public cloud. But I will say that some of the public cloud customer stories I hear are just so good. And I just hope that more customers will challenge themselves, if they're not in environments where they have to be private for whatever reason, to look at the opportunities that public cloud presents, because it's often so much easier to connect different online interfaces, connect your banking data, absorb the latest Joule functionality quickly. What are you hearing from your customers around that aspect?
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Actually, be interesting one to ask Philipp. Like in the next call is with their 7 AI agents. There should be an 8th one, which makes a recommendation for a customer, whether based on analyzing their data footprint, whether they're more suitable to public or private cloud.
Yeah,
because what I kind of hear back from a lot of customers is they're spending a lot of money with SIs trying to get to the data point of what do we do? Do we go public or private?
Yeah.
And in some cases, they're spending maybe $500,000, $1 million just to get to that data point of deciding what's the best strategy.
Yeah.
And again, it should be something that could be simplified for customers to say, based on your current operating model, based on your business processes, you run the analysis and it comes back and says, based on your current system, based on your data volumes, based on everything you're doing, you're 92% fit for public cloud or 87%, or you know what?
Yeah.
No, it ain't going to work for you. Like, and big companies, like we asked SAP last week, they're running a private cloud because, when you got a large multinational organization, like, sometimes there's just a level of complexity that you'll never get in public cloud, and that's okay too. But there's a lot of organizations out there that public cloud will work, and it's just helping them with making that decision and without having to spend a fortune to get there.
Yeah. And I think what's would be really interesting about that agent you described would be especially talking them through the industry part of that, which is the trickiest part, right?
Yeah.
Which is to what extent, because the public cloud is serving a lot more industries now than I realize. They're doing a lot with manufacturing now as well. But, maybe I have some specialized requirements that aren't quite there yet. You could tell me that, right? You could tell me, hey, or you could say, yeah, but you could actually extend this with an app on BTP, or there's an agent that could do this, or so I think it'd be really interesting to get that industry take as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, one of the things we've decided to do this year we're going to, within our user group, we're actually going to stand up a public cloud community later on this year where we just get public cloud customers coming together to, share their stories. Because it's surprising that we had a few at our conference this year with some big companies running public cloud and having really great success stories. So I think what we want to do is share those stories as well, so that you can look at a big company and go, wow, we didn't think they'd be going public cloud, but they did. So I think there's a lot of great stories out there. You just need to elevate it. But it would be cool if there was an AI agent.
I like that. I might mention that to Herzig today.
Yeah. Tell him he can give me commission.
I will, absolutely. Yeah, and
sponsored by the UKISUG group.
Yeah, absolutely. I like it. I will mention. Yeah. And the other final piece of that, I think, is also I want to see how the private cloud RISE is being used for different things now, but the private cloud RISE stories, how they get more and more compelling, because I feel like SAP is going to turn a little bit of a corner here with how they're applying not just the agents, but all this stuff they talked about with LeanIX and Signavio and kind of making RISE the transformation as a service offering that it was originally described as, right? Because it felt like RISE was more of a confusing reallocation of responsibilities between hyperscaler, vendor and SAP or whatever. And now it's starting to feel like a more robust offering that can really help you to change your business with all this, accompanied tooling. And I'm going to be fascinated to see how those RISE stories evolve as well. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, we would meet like fairly regularly with the UK leadership team, the SAP leadership team. And over the years, like the stories change. Like the narrative now is like, they compensate their folks based on outcomes, on system adoption, so there's a different set of metrics that are being used rather than what would have been a couple of years ago, which was in just pure sales. Yeah. So adoption is important. That's why these RISE contracts are so important now, and that it's bigger than just managing the technology. It's helping customers manage their outcomes. And I think, that's a key thing that customers need from SAP to help them be able to be able to reiterate the business case and the value that they're getting from the platform, and also understand where they're not getting the value and help them to basically squeeze the asset more.
Absolutely. Well, Conor, thanks for all y'all are doing to keep SAP on track and keep the community voices heard. And it's going to be a fascinating year. Lots of work to do, but it's going to be a good one, I think.
It's going to be a good one. Looking forward to next year already.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.